Welcome to The Cross in the Classroom, Educating with Eternal Values, the podcast where faith and education come together. Join us every 2 weeks as we connect with the inspiring voices of Valor Christian High School, teachers, students, and leaders, sharing stories of growth, purpose, and the eternal values that guide our community. We're glad you're here.
Welcome to The Cross in the Classroom. In this episode, we are tackling one of the most talked about challenges in education today, the impact of cell phones on student life and learning. Director of Humanities and College Counseling, Toby Kaufman, along with Chief of Parent and Student Affairs and the Director of Safety and Security, Tige Watson, have watched firsthand as smartphones have become ever present in the hallways and classrooms, sparking urgent questions about student engagement, mental health, and community connection. Their concern has grown not only from their professional roles, Tige as an administrator and Toby as a teacher, but also as fathers navigating these same issues with their own children. Motivated by rising anxiety and distraction linked to smartphone use, as well as the practical challenges teachers and students face every day, Valor is exploring how to create healthier boundaries around technology. Toby and Tige explain why this matters so much right now. Listen in to hear their reflections on culture, faith, and technology, as well as a behind-the-scenes look at how Valor is testing fresh approaches to help students, families, and teachers thrive in the digital world. Let's get started.
Well, Tige, here we are again. We're getting to be regulars on the podcast here. I'm not sure if you had this on, like I'm going to work at a school and that means I'm going to be on podcast.
Yeah, I had not thought about that
before. This is not an ambition for me either, but here we are. And I anticipate actually that this is going to be one of the more popular podcasts that we do.
I'm sure.
Because we're talking about cell phones.
Yes.
And if you want a hot button issue regarding schools, in the United States right now, it's AI or it's cell phones, and we haven't done AI yet, but maybe we will. And cell phones today, and so we'll kind of work towards the end of our time together. What Valor is specifically looking to do in the next 6 months to a year to address some of these concerns around smartphones, and I'm excited to get to that. But I think it'd be helpful for us to just talk philosophically and culturally about this for a few minutes as well. Why is this such a big issue now? Why has this become such a thing where you've got states across the country that are very different from one another politically that are moving to enact cell phone bans on school property during the day? And so in the last couple of years, there was one book in particular called The Anxious Generation by NYU professor Jonathan Haidt that we've both read and listened to a lot of Haidt's work and stuff like that too. So I'd love a sense, Tige, from you of how you first got interested in this topic, how it came on your radar, and maybe even as a dad, how you helped your sons navigate this and thought about this as you watched your own kids go to high school.
Yeah, I think it's something that, we've seen the progression, just over time with the introduction of the cell phone and what's happened. And obviously, what I've told parents before too is that we're not saying that the cell phone is evil. It's not. It can be a very helpful, very useful tool in many ways. But in many cases, what we feel like is starting to happen is we're now starting to kind of give dominion over to the cell phone, and it's just taken over lives. And especially when you have teenagers who, they still have this prefrontal cortex that is not fully developed, and it's not closed, and so they don't really know how to regulate themselves, and yet they've been really given the world, as it will, on that cell phone, so they can have access to anything, good and bad. And so I think for myself, it was really starting years ago as I started to see my sons and watch their interaction and their engagement with cell phones when they got them. I think the first cell phone my oldest son got, he actually received it from his grandmother, his nana, and which we weren't completely enthused about, but she was happy to give it to him. But
did she clear that with you first, or was that just?
I think it was a brief clearance. So one of those little Nana initiatives of, hey, I'm a grandmother, I'm going to do this. Yeah. But it was a flip phone, really kind of a flip, and he mostly did text on it. And so he would call us, he would do text. It didn't have a lot of access to many things then. And so then you were really, at that point, it was more so the iPod was kind of the thing that everybody was looking at and storing music, and then its ability to get onto the internet. But started to see that really expand. And ultimately, what I even told some parents that we met with the VPA a little bit ago is that, in my prior life, being a deputy chief with the Albuquerque Fire Department, we actually had a town hall that we held in coordination with the police department. And so they brought some of their IT folks in because we really wanted to talk about just the safety of your students. And at that point, it was really more so safety on the internet, not as much cell phone. But some good points were brought into that discussion in that, they took an IT person from the police department, picked a random person from the crowd. And so, how do you feel about how you've taught your daughter in terms of not sharing information, so on and so forth. And so the parent felt very, very comfortable. My daughter's going to know, she's not going to give you information. So they went from chat room to chat room, they asked about the platforms that she was on. Went to that chat room. The first time she didn't respond, didn't give any information. That was great. But then as he went to subsequent other chat rooms and he was able to engage, he got more information and ultimately ended up getting, where she lived, when her parents were going to be home, and what her parents did. And so all this information that would really identify for her, and then ultimately would cause, a security issue. And within that, then the police chief talked about coming home late after a call and said, I pull up into my driveway and I can see this low glow upstairs where my daughter's room is. So he thought, well, what's going on? He went upstairs and found her kind of under her covers on her cell phone. And so they were able to engage in a very intentional conversation. And then from that, we all took suggestions of, hey, there should be boundaries on this new device. And putting them in a basket, and that they should be, plugged in a way, and so on and so forth. And so that's one of the things we really started doing with our kids, is that when they got home, those cell phones were in a basket, plugged in, lots of boundaries. And ultimately what they understood is that I paid for that cell phone, that really belonged to me. And so there was no right to privacy. I was going to check through it, and I was going to look and to make sure that you were using it appropriately. And so I feel like that's something that they were able to convey later on in life, and making some of those appropriate decisions. Now, was it always perfect? No. But ultimately, I think it did, if you were to ask them, make an impact, knowing that, hey, my parents they have some requirements, they have some expectations and some standards, but they're also showing me, how to use this cell phone. And so now fast forward to where we are current day, is just that you just see kids inundated with information, with this access to a cell phone, watching kids, not even just at Valor, but anywhere, and it feels like they're just tied to this screen. They're just looking at this screen. And so, one of the problems we feel like we've identified here at Valor, a couple of the problems would be, is we feel like there's, disengagement and disconnection from peers. We feel like there's a distraction that occurs outside of the classroom, and then even some teachers would say inside the classroom. I read a stat just recently where it said 72% of educators felt like cell phones were a distraction for their classroom. And so those are
were the other 28% too busy on their own phones that they
probably
didn't notice.
Probably so. And so that's where we've said, hey, what should we do to address this? And then, my colleague, Ashley Loiza and I, we've been part of a master's program where this has really been, they've talked a lot about the cell phone and freedom from cell phones. And so as we've discussed that with, Dr. John Eckert and Dr. Eric Ellison, we've really started to focus on this. And then that's where we had an opportunity to look at a lot of Jonathan Haidt's information.
Yeah, very cool. So let's talk about height for a little bit. This has been an issue I've been super interested in for a long time too. I'm raising kids. I've got my first kid at Valor this year. I feel the pull myself to the cell phone, right? The second you're bored for half a second, it's like, man, let's open this thing, and instant freedom from boredom. I don't have to be alone with my thoughts at all. I can just kind of turn over to this machine. And so it's something I think even parents, not only are we watching our students and kids and how they're using these, but we're probably doing some reflection on ourselves a little bit too. And what behavior am I modeling for my kids?
Yes.
Like, what are they seeing from me in my interaction with a cell phone? But I want to talk, maybe we don't have time to cover everything in Haidt, but let's scratch the surface of some of his findings around mental health concerns. And so if there's anything you would like to highlight there, and then there's one other element from the book I'd like to talk about too, but go ahead. What did he find about anxiety? It's called The Anxious Generation,
yes.
The kind of leading in the title, but what did he find?
Yeah. So, I mean, really for Haidt, it's just that with the introduction of the cell phone in 2010, what we really saw was this, this deleterious effect upon the mental health of our students. And so ultimately, if you look at, let's take depression. So depression from 2010 to I think a 2023, ultimately what he found is you had for young ladies, it was 135% increase in depression. For young men, it was 161% increase. Then you take just the prevalence of anxiety. And then when they took that snapshot of anxiety from the ages 18 to 24, if you looked back and you'd say in around that 2010 period, it was an 8% prevalence. And then now in that 2023 area, it was a 19.9% prevalence in anxiety. And then say for suicide. And so for suicides between the ages of 15 and 19, what you really saw was young ladies were roughly about 45%. They increased all the way up to 45%, and young men about 65%. So just these dramatic increases, these upshots that you saw after 2010 into 2012, and then straight up when it came to mental health. And so you also have these students that have the ability to just look at this phone and a lot of content that's unregulated, where they can look on YouTube, and it's a lot of there's a lot of violent content on YouTube that's unregulated. There's a lot of comparison and identity crisis. And so then ultimately what we're seeing is kids who are now engaging in self-harm, and so that self-harm is also shot off the chart.
Yeah. One of the things he talks about too is that it's affected boys and girls differently. That, for example, a rise in depression rates for boys has been more dramatic, but boys started from a lower level.
Right.
That for girls, a lot of the insidious nature of the smartphone use. And it's one of those things I think about a lot, because I remember very well when Steve Jobs first introduced the iPhone, and he showed it on stage, and he literally described it as, this is an iPod that makes phone calls. And that's what he thought of it as. This is a music playing device that makes phone calls. And very, very quickly it became something far beyond what he imagined or even intended it to be when he first designed it. But for girls, so much of where this difficulty comes in is in comparison, social media, things like that. For boys, it tends to fall broadly into things like pornography and video game use. And so even as we think about this, like this, there's no single problem effect, and something like YouTube is relatively tame to things that you can find off of YouTube on other platforms. And so I think the other thing I want to talk about in terms of the book, one of the things that I found super interesting is he talks about cell phone use, and even that there are a lot of people that want to move away from this. There are a lot of parents that want to move away from this for their kids, but he defines it as a collective action problem. that it's really, really hard to be the one kid in 6th grade without a phone. And so one of the things they're trying to do is build communities of people who make pledges together to, we're in this, like, lock arms. Yes. Our kids won't have cell phones till a certain age. So can you talk about this a little bit? Like, how is this a collective action problem? And I think I'll use that to segue into what we're looking into doing as a school.
Yeah, I think it is difficult to be that one student at school that doesn't have a cell phone or doesn't have access to something. And we know that it's that group think, right? And it's everybody coming together and we're moving in a particular direction. And so for us to just come on board and just to do what everybody else is doing. And so at Valor, what we've always said is we really want you to live above the crowd. And so that's part of our challenge. But we also feel like we want to train our kids up to really be, to transform the world for Christ and to be leaders. And so the best way for that to happen is we can do that together, and we can overcome some of these challenges, these obstacles, these difficulties together, because we do know that this is going to be a challenge. We know that this is a drastic change in many of their lives in terms of what kids are used to, their access to their cell phones, not having any real restriction. And so we know that if we can challenge them, but we're all doing this together, it's a shared struggle, if you will, that then that's when we can really put our minds to something, is when we feel like it's a shared struggle. And so we want everybody, our parents, our students, our staff, and faculty to come alongside and say, hey, this is a shared burden that we all want to take part in. And because this is something that we know is dramatic and it's impacting our kids. It's they say that it's that heavy cell phone usage has that continuous, enduring and deleterious effect upon a student's brain, whereby they can't focus and they can't apply themselves as they really should. And then beyond that, it's really just this constant, this continuous administration of these small pleasures has that ultimately that sustained, produces a sustained impact on the brain's reward system. So now then it's I have decreased motivation and really even decreased pleasure. So it gets worse and worse because, and even if I'm sitting with my friends, it gets worse and worse because, the one thing before that was pleasurable is now it's not anymore. And so now I got to continue to elevate, to go up. And that's where, like you said before, we start becoming concerned about access to pornography and inappropriate content, because before what may have shocked me and brought that small little jolt, now all of a sudden I have to continue to elevate.
Yeah, you need more to get the same hit.
Yes,
you got the first.
And
time.
that's where it becomes worrisome. And so we're saying, hey, we know this is a burden. Let's share the burden together. It lightens the load. And so then let's move in a positive direction.
Yeah, Tige, I love what you're saying. And I think it is, I've talked with kids in our classrooms for a long time about this issue. And one of the things that comes up pretty consistently, I would say, in these conversations, and it gives me a lot of compassion for kids in this generation, is they didn't choose any of this. This is a massive society-wide experiment that was run on them without their say-so, without their consent. And so I think a lot of times one of the ways that I frame it is, and I even talk this way, this is kind of the language of our household, is we want to give permission to the people around us by the way that we live to live in a way that honors God. And so by giving you permission to live actually the way you want to, you just maybe don't have the courage to do it on your own. And to kind of be the lone wolf here. And so that's what I'm really hoping that we're moving towards, is we're giving kids, families permission to live the way that they want to live, because we're decreasing the ubiquity of cell phones in everyday life, in the hallways and the interactions. Because one of the other things that's dropped off a cliff for this generation is time spent hanging out face to face with their friends, and the connection that we get through being in the same room, making eye contact, having our gestures, having our emphasis, being in the room is different than what you get mediated through a screen. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about this. We've got a pilot program coming up in a couple of weeks for the freshman class. There's something during V week in the spring. So kind of walk me through what Valor is softly rolling out this year, and the trajectory that might put us on.
Certainly, yeah. So we're starting this pilot with our freshman class, October the 20th through the 24th. And ultimately, it's this pilot because, we know that there have been at least 18 states that have done an outright ban. Have done usually an executive order or a legislative order where there's been an outright ban. And now we have 38 states that have some sort of restriction, all in total. And here in Colorado, in fact, the governor has said is July 1 of 2026, he wants every school district to have some sort of policy. And so for us here at Valor, we said, well, we want to get ahead of that, but we also want to really dictate how we respond to this and what we want to do. And we don't want to just mandate something. And so we've also been able to say, we know that there's some stakeholders that may not be in agreement. We want to be able to hear from them. Mm-hmm. And then we also know there have been some institutions who have said, hey, we implemented some of these things. Right. We had to roll some things back because it just didn't work. And so quite honestly, we want to make sure that when we do this, we do it right. And so part of doing this right is to be intentional, to be thoughtful, and to say, hey, let's start with a pilot, a small sample, being the freshman, because we have a small sample size. Mm-hmm. We have a willing group. Mm-hmm. They're really at the beginning of their time here. And so it's a great time to introduce healthy habits and expectations. And then they're also within the context of being within the seminar class. Mm-hmm. And so they can engage and interact with their seminar teacher, and he can really get that feedback about what's going on and what's happening. And then we're doing this kind of really in coordination with their social media unit, where they're talking about social media, proper, application of social media, proper use of social media. So this is a great time for that to happen. We said, here's where the pilot should really fit for our freshmen. Then giving pre-surveys to our freshmen and freshman parents so we can hear, what is it about the cell phone, social media? What are the guidelines? What are the boundaries in your home? How can you be well supported? That sort of thing. Then after that's over, post-survey sent out to say, how did it go? Did you learn anything from it? Was it difficult? Was it challenging? Did you hate it? Those sort of things. And then ultimately, as you said, then in the spring during our V week in February, is to do the entire school. So we're hoping that this pilot will then inform some of those policies and procedures and processes to then say, okay, how does this work? And how are we going to move forward with any sort of cell phone freedom here at Valor, and trying it with the whole school. And then once we do the same thing pre and post survey with the whole school, then ultimately, okay, we'll come back together and talk about what we should do. And so what I should highlight too is we have these adaptive challenge teams that are composed of teachers and administrators. And really what I want to do is to invite some parents who would like to be able to participate in that, to really talk about, the good, the bad, to introduce any of their concerns, any of the obstacles that they might see, because we can't see everything. And so we want to hear from them, because we want this to go well. And we want to be informed and say, let's move forward, or should we move forward, or how do we move forward?
Yeah, no, I love that. I actually think that's a huge gift to our community. And I hope parents, kids, as you're watching this, I hope you hear our heart here, that we're really trying to explore what would be best for you. We want you to be able to thrive as students, as teenagers. We want you to be able to thrive as families. And so we're not just going to rush into a decision. We want to be really thoughtful and take receive a lot of feedback. But this is a big deal, and it seems like we need to take seriously some of the challenges that smartphones have presented to the classroom and the environment of a school, and partner with parents and see what that would look like. Yes. But that's I think the hope for both of us is that we get some really good feedback and on both sides for how this went, and it helps us prepare for what might come down the road. But I'm glad we're doing something, and my hope is that that's what the community sees too.
I hope so. And I would say, and just for me, one last thing is just to ask you, because you have a freshman.
Yeah.
You're a colleague, and I know you've done a lot of research and reading on your own. Is, what do you do within the context of your family and with your kids and your use of the cell phone?
Yeah, I'll try to keep the answer brief. But one of the things that I think, because of Haidt, because of the anxious generation, some companies have released phones with different optionality. And so with our son, who's a freshman, he has what's called a Bark phone. This is a company. It is a smartphone. It looks like a regular phone, but it has limited internet use. The parent can control kind of what gets rolled out, what apps get added, what contacts get added. And so it's a way of giving the ability to make a phone call, to connect with friends and stuff like that, but not to have the whole internet open to the kid. And so we really enjoyed that. I don't know how much my son's enjoyed that. My wife and I have enjoyed that. And within our home, we have just kind of a sock drawer rule, is what I call it. When I get home, my phone goes out of sight. We make our son keep his down in a shared common space too. It gets charged in our kitchen along with his laptop. It's the same there. That stays in a shared common space as well. Excellent. But we've really we bought a record player, and like that's how we play music in the evening, is we spin records, and we just try to kind of buy back some time from these digital devices that we just felt were increasingly encroaching on our life together. And it's been a really rich experience for us as a family.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the time, Tige. And I think there'll probably be a part 2 about this at some point too, as we assess how these pilot programs went. But glad we're doing something, and hopefully this steers us in the right direction.
That's great. Looking forward to it.
Cool.
Thanks, Toby.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us on The Cross in the Classroom, educating with eternal values. We hope today's conversation inspired and encouraged you. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and stay connected with the Valor Christian High School community. Keep living out faith, learning with purpose, and growing in grace. Until next time.